Welcome to Xnoesis, where we delve into the profound depths of existence, exploring the intricate tapestry of life with a gentle curiosity that invites not just understanding, but a tranquil journey inward, perhaps even toward the threshold of slumber. Tonight, our exploration will lead us through terrains of human experience, often considered too intimate, too raw, or too foundational for casual contemplation. We shall discuss aspects of human physiology and the complex interplay between our biological heritage and our interpersonal dynamics. This discussion, though framed within a scientific perspective, touches upon deeply personal and sometimes startling truths. Therefore, it is suggested that you absorb these reflections in a space of personal quiet, free from the distractions of external influences or the presence of those who might find such candor unsettling. Allow your mind to simply observe, without judgment or haste, as we explore the very fabric of our being. Now I invite you, for a fleeting moment, to attune your inner ear, to listen with a profound sense of self-awareness to a statement that, on its surface, appears remarkably simple, yet holds within it an entire universe of implications. Ready? Humankind evolved from apes. How does that reverberate within your perception? Most likely the impact is minimal, perhaps even negligible, which is in itself a truly astonishing phenomenon. One might suggest that this is akin to the way we now encounter the statement, "The entire cosmos originated from a point smaller than a single atom." Initially, such a revelation was mind-boggling, a concept that defied the very limits of imagination, stirring a sense of cosmic awe. Yet, with repeated exposure, its profound significance gradually diminishes, often reaching a point where it elicits, at best, a weary familiarity, perhaps even a slight sense of irritation due to its ubiquity. Similarly, the notion of our simian ancestry has been articulated so frequently, permeated our collective consciousness so thoroughly, that at some undefined juncture, its power to provoke wonder simply evaporated. However, a more introspective inquiry might lead one to question, was there, in fact, ever a moment in your personal journey, in the unfolding narrative of your understanding, when this particular truth truly struck you with its full disarming force? Because, in its deepest essence, this is one of those fundamental realities that, while intellectually accepted due to its robust scientific validation, often remains profoundly incongruent with our most deeply ingrained conceptions of the world and, more significantly, of ourselves. To genuinely grapple with its astonishing implications, to allow the full weight of its meaning to settle upon your consciousness, one must first be willing to confront certain less than flattering details, to peel back the layers of culturally constructed self-perception. Consider this: our inherent difficulty in embracing our primal origins, our persistent tendency to position ourselves in stark opposition to our ancestral lineage, is vividly manifest in the very designation we have bestowed upon our own species. It is a title both presumptuous and, from a strictly scientific vantage point, remarkably imprecise. Homo sapiens, wise human. Naturally, what species would ever elect to label itself with an unflattering epithet? Yet, its scientific imprecision stems from the fact that, within the rigorous framework of scientific inquiry, there is little tolerance for vague, subjective descriptors such as wise. What, precisely, does wisdom truly entail, especially when applied across the vast spectrum of human behavior and cognitive capability? It is a term fraught with ambiguity, lacking the quantifiable parameters typically demanded by scientific classification. Therefore, as we embark upon this journey, I must forewarn you, for I intend to request of you an endeavor that borders on the improbable, given our species' deeply ingrained predilection for self-congratulatory exceptionalism. For the duration of this exploration, I urge you to endeavor to perceive the information I shall impart with an unwavering impartiality, as if you were an extraterrestrial observer, a dispassionate intelligence from a distant star, encountering humanity for the very first time. Imagine that your task is to accurately classify our species according to contemporary scientific criteria, free from the biases of our own self-mythologizing. From such an objective vantage point, the name bestowed upon our kind would undoubtedly be far more transparent, more immediately reflective of our most striking and singular attributes. Any impartial interstellar researcher, observing our biological distinctiveness, would likely arrive at a remarkably different conclusion. Among the approximately 505 known species of apes, both great and small, a singular and striking anomaly presents itself. Across 504 of these species, one observes a dense, protective covering of fur or hair, an evolutionary adaptation that serves multiple vital functions, including insulation, camouflage, and even sensory perception. Yet, when one turns their attention to the 505th species, the anomaly becomes profoundly evident. This species stands alone, utterly devoid of a comprehensive, species-wide coat of hair. This solitary, naked form, quite distinct from its hirsute relatives, is Homo sapiens. Therefore, the naked ape is the designation that, with rigorous scientific precision, ought to have been assigned to our kind, had our species not been so profoundly entrenched in its own self-congratulatory pride and anthropocentric bias. And you, dear listener, scarcely comprehend. Indeed, you possess not even the faintest suspicion, the colossal, almost monstrous extent to which so much of your innate being, your complex behaviors, your deepest urges and inclinations, can be unequivocally traced back to this very primal, animalistic nature. Our ancient instincts, honed and refined over millions of years of evolutionary pressure, remain profoundly embedded within the intricate architecture of our minds and bodies. They have not simply vanished. Rather, they persist as a potent, subterranean current, subtly yet profoundly shaping our daily lives, influencing decisions we often attribute to conscious choice or cultural conditioning. Soon, as we continue this exploration, you will begin to discern these enduring echoes of our distant past for yourself, recognizing their indelible imprint upon the human condition. For, despite all our technological marvels, our boundless erudition, our soaring intellectual achievements, Homo sapiens remains, at its fundamental core, the naked ape. This perspective, this foundational understanding of human nature, was powerfully articulated by one of the towering figures in the field of ethology, the scientific study of animal behavior. This individual, Desmond John Morris, was not only the author of numerous influential scientific treatises, but also penned popular books and produced engaging films, establishing himself as one of the most renowned and original scientific minds of his era. His seminal and indeed controversial work, titled The Naked Ape, made its debut in 1967. From that moment, it transcended the status of a mere bestseller, ascending to the rarefied heights of a super bestseller. With sales exceeding 20 million copies, it achieved a level of commercial success that, for a book centered on anthropology, was nothing short of unprecedented, virtually unimaginable. To place this remarkable achievement in perspective, consider Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, a work that has become an iconic touchstone within popular science literature, a title seemingly familiar to nearly everyone. That monumental work, though a more recent publication, only recently surpassed the 10 million sales mark. The influence of Desmond Morris's The Naked Ape, on the intellectual landscape of Western society, profoundly shaping its perspectives and understandings, has been immense. It has undergone more than 20 reprintings, enduring as a vital source of insight across generations. Specialists from every conceivable division and subdivision of biology have drawn inspiration from its pages, a testament to its enduring relevance and intellectual vigor. And I assure you, I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I say that the naked ape continues to provoke, to this very day, passionate and sometimes even acrimonious debate, a full half-century after its initial publication. One need only review the comments sections of articles, such as those published by Time the Guardian, to commemorate the book's 50th anniversary, to gain a vivid impression of the intensity of these ongoing discussions. Inspired by Morris's groundbreaking work, and having delved into a multitude of other sources as is customary in these explorations, I embarked upon this particular monologue to investigate the very essence of the naked ape that so profoundly captivated its readership. What lies within its pages that resonated so deeply with millions? What it offers, quite simply, is a series of stark, unvarnished revelations about our very selves, exploring not only the ways in which evolution has sculpted our physical forms, but also, and perhaps even more surprisingly, the profound impact it has exerted upon the intricate labyrinth of our psychology. It might often seem to you that a significant portion of your daily actions, the choices you make throughout your life, are a direct manifestation of your own autonomous will, your unique individual preferences, or, at the very least, you might attribute them to the pervasive influence of the cultural environment in which you are immersed. However, as we shall uncover, this perspective is not entirely accurate, or perhaps not accurate at all, in its deepest implications. But let us not hasten our journey. Allow the revelations to unfold at their own deliberate pace. Some of Morris's insights are undeniably amusing, provoking a gentle chuckle or a wry smile. Others can be quite uncomfortable, unsettling to the self-image we often cultivate. Certain observations might cause a blush to rise, much like a verdant youth confronted with an unexpected truth. And there are indeed aspects of his analysis that are, quite frankly, outrageous, challenging deeply held assumptions about our perceived sophistication. At times, one might experience this entire spectrum of emotions simultaneously, a complex internal resonance of amusement, discomfort, embarrassment, and indignant surprise. Consider, for instance, a seemingly trivial yet universally present feature of our anatomy, those peculiar, fleshy protrusions at the lower extremity of our ears, which we commonly refer to as earlobes. From a purely biological standpoint, these structures appear to consume a noticeable portion of the body's metabolic resources. They are copiously supplied with blood, indicating a significant physiological investment, and they possess a remarkable density of nerve endings, rendering them exquisitely sensitive. Yet, despite this considerable biological allocation, they appear, at first glance, utterly devoid of any practical utility. The prevailing consensus among a great many scientists today is that earlobes, quite literally, possess no discernible biological function that contributes to our survival or reproductive success in any obvious manner. Were they to be absent, it is widely believed, nothing of fundamental consequence would change in our physiological makeup or capabilities. And yet, evolution, as is well known, is a remarkably parsimonious process, a grand sculptor that rarely tolerates superfluous extravagance without a compelling adaptive reason. So for what purpose do they exist? Desmond Morris put forth a compelling hypothesis that earlobes, rather than being vestigial remnants or incidental developments, emerged through the slow, deliberate grind of evolution with a singular, primary objective: to function as an erogenous zone. Their purpose, in this context, would be to enhance the pleasurable experiences shared between partners. thereby serving a crucial role in strengthening the marital or pair bond. This, in turn, contributes to the stability of the family unit, which, as we shall explore, is profoundly significant for our species. Conventionally, earlobes are often considered to be lingering traces, faint echoes of a bygone era when our ancestral ears might have been considerably larger. However, if one directs their observational gaze toward other primate species, a striking absence becomes apparent. They do not possess these distinctively fleshy, pendulous earlobes. This observation strongly suggests that these are not merely relics of the past, but rather a relatively recent acquisition, a novel evolutionary development unique to our lineage. The revelation that, during moments of sexual arousal, earlobes become engorged with blood, swelling slightly and intensifying in their sensitivity, leaves little room for doubt regarding their primary purpose. In fact, there have been documented instances where the stimulation of earlobes, in both men and women, has been reported to induce orgasmic sensations, underscoring their potent role as an additional, evolved erogenous zone. If one were to distill the central, overarching thesis of Desmond Morris's entire book, it would coalesce around this profound assertion that everything we hold to be the loftiest, the most elevated, and the most sublime aspects of our individual lives and the collective human experience, the profound ties of familial connection, the enduring bonds of friendship, the exhilarating surge of romantic love, the deeply held convictions of religious faith, indeed, any aspiration or sentiment. Morris emphatically posits that we are not only compelled to acknowledge this immutable foundation of our being but, more importantly, to approach it with a profound sense of respect and understanding. To disregard this foundational truth, or to attempt to rebel against the very core of our primal nature, or to simply choose to ignore its pervasive influence, will inevitably lead to outcomes that are far from beneficial, often resulting in profound disorientation or even outright dysfunction within the human psyche and societal structure. Our cultural advancements, particularly in the realm of technology, have undeniably allowed us to achieve impressive, even breathtaking, successes. We have sculpted the environment, harnessed formidable energies, and extended the reach of our senses and capabilities far beyond the limits of our biological design. Yet, time and again, whenever the inexorable march of technological or cultural progress encounters the fundamental, deeply rooted properties of our biological makeup, that progress is met with a formidable and often unexpected resistance. The foundational tenets of our behavioral character, those ancient blueprints laid down during the epoch when we were primarily ape-like hunter-gatherers, remain discernibly etched into the very fabric of our every action, no matter how sophisticated, how altruistic, or how intellectually elevated those actions may appear on the surface. These deep-seated patterns continue to exert their influence, a subtle yet persistent undercurrent shaping the trajectory of our lives. Consider a profoundly influential event that shaped the entirety of your life, an event that transpired at the very dawn of your existence, within the nurturing confines of your mother's womb. If you were to observe mothers as they hold their newborn infants, a remarkable and surprisingly consistent pattern would become apparent. Extensive research conducted by scientists has consistently revealed that an overwhelming majority, approximately 80% of mothers, instinctively position their infant on their left arm, pressing the child close to the left side of their body. One might initially assume the explanation for this widespread behavior is straightforward, even self-evident. Given that the vast majority of individuals are right-handed, holding the infant in the left arm would naturally liberate the dominant, stronger hand for the execution of various everyday tasks, from preparing meals to writing. However, a more meticulous and detailed analysis of the phenomenon reveals a surprising nuance. suggesting that this seemingly obvious explanation is, in fact, not entirely accurate. Strikingly, studies have shown that there is very little significant difference between right-handed women and left-handed women in terms of the side on which they cradle their infants. Approximately 83% of right-handed mothers and a notable 78% of left-handed mothers consistently hold their babies on the left side. This compelling consistency across handedness strongly indicates that a deeper, more fundamental explanation must be at play, transcending the pragmatic considerations of manual dexterity. The most compelling explanation, the singular unifying reason for this widespread maternal behavior, lies in the simple, immutable fact that the human heart is situated on the left side of the chest. Approximately 3 months before birth, the developing fetus in the womb acquires the nascent ability to perceive auditory stimuli. And what is among the very first, most consistent, and most profoundly imprinted sounds to reach the growing embryo within the uterine environment? It is the rhythmic, steady beating of the maternal heart, typically at an average rate of around 70 beats per minute. For this developing being, which has yet to experience sight, taste, or olfaction, whose entire sensory world is a nascent and primarily internal one, virtually all of its formative experience is inextricably linked to this pervasive, sonorous rhythm, coupled with the enveloping sensations of warmth and absolute security. This initial, primal auditory and tactile imprint is a foundational experience, one that will leave an enduring, powerful mark upon its nascent consciousness, shaping its deepest responses and comfort-seeking behaviors for the entirety of its life. Following birth, the mother, often quite unconsciously, instinctively presses her newborn to that very location on her body which allows the infant to continue hearing this profoundly familiar and comforting sound, a sound forever interwoven with sensations of profound comfort and unwavering protection. It is a biological imperative, an unconscious echo of the prenatal environment designed to soothe and reassure the vulnerable new life. Simultaneously, the vestibular apparatus, that intricate system responsible for perceiving and orienting our body's position within three-dimensional space, along with the cochlea, the spiraling structure critical for the reception and interpretation of sound, are both housed within the inner ear, appearing as integral components of a unified sensory system. This anatomical juxtaposition likely explains the deep, instinctual efficacy of rhythmic motions, the gentle rocking of an infant in arms or within a cradle, when executed at a rhythm closely approximating 60 to 70 oscillations per minute, precisely the approximate rate of a maternal heartbeat, invariably calms the child, fostering a rapid descent into restorative sleep. The profound influence of this primal rhythm extends far beyond infancy, even in adulthood. If, as you prepare for sleep, you were to introduce a recording of a steady, measured heartbeat into your auditory environment, you would likely find that the process of falling asleep becomes noticeably easier, more fluid, and perhaps even more profound. Throughout your entire life, particularly during moments of heightened stress, or when you experience profound emotional distress or discomfort, you will often find yourself, quite unconsciously, engaging in rhythmic, repetitive motions. This might manifest as swaying gently back and forth, shifting your weight from one foot to the other, or even tapping your fingers rhythmically on a surface. All these seemingly disparate actions are, in their deepest essence, attempts to reconnect with that familiar, profoundly soothing rhythm, an echo of the maternal womb, a primal cadence of comfort and security. Each time you perceive yourself to be in a state of vulnerability, unprotected by the world, your innate mechanisms guide you towards finding a comforting heartbeat rhythm, a familiar pulse that manifests in various forms, subtly yet profoundly reassuring your nervous system. Consider the remarkable behavior of an ape mother. She maintains an almost constant physical connection with her offspring, a bond greatly facilitated by the innate instinct of young apes to cling tenaciously to the fur covering their mother's body. These small, vulnerable infants are capable of executing this vital, gripping action quite literally, from the very first moments after their birth, an immediate, life-sustaining reflex. Human infants, however, are fundamentally incapable of replicating this behavior, primarily for two distinct reasons. Firstly, their nascent muscular strength is simply insufficient to maintain such a prolonged, firm grip. Secondly, and perhaps more crucially, the human mother, unlike her simian counterparts, is almost entirely devoid of the dense fur that would provide a secure purchase for clinging. Nevertheless, despite the absence of fur and the relative weakness of human newborns, this deeply ingrained inherited program, the imperative to grasp onto the mother's body covering, has not been expunged from the human genetic blueprint. Even a 6-month-old fetus, still within the womb, already possesses a remarkably strong grip. At the moment of birth, any gentle stimulation of a newborn's palm will instinctively trigger a powerful clenching of the fingers, a grip sufficiently robust to allow an adult to lift the infant clear of a surface for a brief period. However, in stark contrast to the sustained tenacity of an ape infant, a human baby is unable to maintain this grasp for any significant duration. This ephemeral strength is, perhaps, not entirely surprising given the circumstances of human development. What is truly remarkable, however, and arguably far more astonishing, is the presence in human infants of a distinct reflex known as the Moro reflex. The manifestation of the Moro reflex can be readily observed if a caregiver rapidly yet gently lowers an infant a short distance while supporting the baby's back. In response, the infant's arms will immediately splay outwards, their fingers extending and opening wide. Subsequently, the arms swiftly converge back toward the body, as if attempting to embrace or cling to something, striving to prevent a perceived fall. This precise sequence of movements is an exact analog to the actions of a startled ape infant, who, sensing an imminent fall, instinctively grasps at its mother's fur for security. In human infants, this distinctly ape-like reaction persists until approximately 8 weeks of age. The enduring presence of the Moro reflex, alongside the strong, albeit temporary, grasping reflex, repeatedly brings us back to a fundamental, perplexing question. Where, precisely, is our fur? Why, among the vast and diverse array of ape species, are we, and we alone, utterly naked? Imagine, for a moment, finding yourself in a wild, untamed environment, completely unclothed, that is to say, in the very state in which nature, presumably, intended your existence, and situated in the geographical locale where nature had, theoretically, envisioned your habitation. Even under the idyllic conditions of a warm, temperate climate, consider the immense challenges you would face in performing even the most basic actions. Movement, for instance, would prove extraordinarily problematic. Tree branches would constantly abrade your unprotected skin, countless insects would bite and irritate, and the very ground beneath your feet would present a host of abrasive or uncomfortable textures. From a purely evolutionary perspective, this absence of a protective integument appears, at first blush, to be a radical miscalculation, a profound oversight in our biological design. Disregard, for a moment, the fact that we are the singular naked ape. Extend your observations to encompass virtually any other terrestrial mammal. Setting aside, of course, the thick-skinned exceptions such as elephants and rhinoceroses. Without exception, almost all are covered in a dense coat of fur or hair. Its absence for the vast majority of these creatures is evidently not considered an advantageous trait. How, then, could such a demonstrably useful biological feature have been lost, seemingly out of nowhere, without a clear and compelling evolutionary impetus. This question presented an exceedingly complex enigma for researchers, prompting the formulation of a multitude of hypotheses, some more plausible than others. For example, the widely circulated explanations we often encounter, narratives suggesting that because we devised warm clothing and discovered fire, we gradually, almost inevitably shed our bodily hair, are, in their essence, entirely fallacious. I confess, I was genuinely taken aback when I uncovered the true, initial purpose for which humanity originally conceived of clothing. Cold, surprisingly, was not the primary catalyst. Clothing, astonishingly, made its debut in human history, at a time when our ancestral populations still inhabited hot, tropical regions. But we will delve into that intriguing revelation later in our journey. Approximately 1.5 million years ago, a dramatic shift in global climatic conditions fundamentally altered the trajectory of our ancestors' lives. Faced with increasingly arid and less hospitable forest environments, our forebears were compelled to abandon the abundant resources of the primeval forest, venturing out onto the vast, open savannas. Here, they found themselves in direct competition with terrestrial animals that had already, over countless generations, exquisitely adapted to these open country conditions. This transition was fraught with immense peril. Consider for a moment the efficiency and explosive power of modern predators, their lightning-fast sprints, their calculated pounces designed to bring down swift prey. Our ancestors, however, possessed none of these specialized evolutionary advantages. They lacked the searing speed, the formidable claws, or the crushing jaws of their carnivorous rivals. Instead, they were compelled to develop a unique and demanding strategy, to learn to pursue faster prey, not through immediate speed, but through sheer, relentless endurance, tirelessly chasing their quarry until it simply succumbed to exhaustion. Indeed, prolonged, sustained running in a dense, insulating coat of fur is, to put it mildly, an activity that is far from comfortable, and indeed, often proves to be mortally dangerous due to the acute risk of severe overheating. This dire circumstance exerted an intense selective pressure on our ancestors. Any genetic mutation, any physiological adaptation that could diminish the risk of overheating, even at the cost of disadvantages in other areas, was strongly favored by natural selection. Our forebears were, in essence, prepared to pay any price for the successful resolution of this critical thermoregulatory problem was intrinsically linked to the very survival and continued existence of the species. Thus, through this crucible of necessity, we shed a significant portion of our dense body hair, simultaneously acquiring an exceptionally large number of sweat glands distributed across the entirety of our skin surface. The combination of features that emerged from this evolutionary crucible, hairless skin, an unparalleled capacity for perspiration, and the adoption of bipedal locomotion, converged to forge what are in essence the most remarkably enduring beings on our planet when it comes to long-distance running. Bipedalism, the act of walking upright on two legs, reduced the surface area of the body directly exposed to the intense overhead sun, ensuring that only the crown of the head, where a small patch of hair judiciously remained, absorbed the most direct solar radiation. This upright posture, coupled with our unique thermoregulatory system, means that, in terms of sustained, marathon-like endurance over vast distances, there is literally no other animal known to exist that can outrun a human. We possess the innate capacity to pursue and exhaust virtually any antelope or deer to the point of its demise, regardless of their superior initial speed. For these swift creatures, we represent nothing less than an implacable, inescapable inevitability, a relentless force that will pursue them until their very strength is utterly depleted. A compelling example of this extraordinary human capacity is the American ultramarathon runner Dean Xnoesis, who, in 2005, accomplished the astonishing feat of running 563 kilometers, approximately 350 miles, over 80 consecutive hours, without pausing for sleep or rest. Yet, this remarkable endurance is not the sole testament to our unique evolutionary journey. If one were to observe the human form as it navigates through water, it becomes apparent just how extraordinarily streamlined and hydrodynamic our bodies are when compared to any other ape species. Even our closest genetic relatives, the chimpanzees, are largely helpless in aquatic environments, quickly succumbing to the water's embrace and rapidly drowning. A meticulous examination of the alignment of hairs on one's own body reveals a fascinating pattern. They are directed backward and inward, at a subtle angle towards the spine. This specific orientation precisely coincides with the direction of water flow as it parts around a swimmer's body, strongly suggesting that this arrangement evolved to minimize water resistance during aquatic movement. Furthermore, we are the sole primate species to possess a thick layer of subcutaneous fat, a biological feature that, in its principle, is remarkably similar to the blubber found in marine mammals like seals. This insulating layer serves to retain body heat when immersed in water, a crucial adaptation for surviving in cooler aquatic environments. And here, another intriguing observation comes to the forefront. It is widely noticed how the skin on our fingertips and toes develops a distinctive wrinkled appearance after only a few minutes of immersion in water. This phenomenon is unique. No other area of our body reacts to water in quite the same way. Moreover, surgeons have observed that if certain specific nerves in the fingers are damaged, the skin in those areas ceases to wrinkle, indicating a neurologically mediated process. This strongly suggests that this wrinkling is not merely a passive osmotic effect, but rather a sophisticated evolutionary adaptation. Scientists postulate that this wrinkled skin functions in a manner analogous to specialized tire treads. One might recall observing, during Formula One races, that when rain begins, the smooth, slick tires on the race cars are quickly swapped for tires equipped with intricate grooves. These channels are designed to effectively displace water, preventing hydroplaning and ensuring that the vehicle maintains traction and stability on the wet surface. The fundamental purpose of wrinkled fingers is precisely the same. Thanks to this subtle yet ingenious evolutionary development within your body, you are endowed with an enhanced capacity to navigate barefoot across wet, slippery surfaces and to maintain a more secure grip on moist objects. This adaptation would have been undeniably beneficial in scenarios involving aquatic hunting, for instance, when an individual might need to firmly grasp a spear while treading on slick, water-covered stones or rocks. Humankind, as we can discern, has traversed an extraordinarily long and intricate path of evolution, progressively adapting to ever-changing environmental conditions and meticulously optimizing every process within the organism. All of these profound transformations, it must be emphasized, transpired entirely beyond the realm of our conscious will or deliberate intent. Returning now to our discussion of the loss of abundant body hair, an unexpected and profoundly advantageous consequence of this evolutionary transformation was a heightened degree of pleasure experienced during intimate physical contact with a partner. This increased sensuality, in turn, served as a powerful reinforcing mechanism, further solidifying the pair bond and strengthening the family unit. Indeed, just as with the intriguing case of the earlobes, I find myself once again highlighting the profound significance of the family unit, for it appears, upon deeper examination, that the classical concept of the family is not merely a cultural construct, an arbitrary invention of human society, but rather a deeply rooted, fundamental outgrowth of our inherent biology. The overarching biological imperative for any living creature is to find a suitable mate and successfully reproduce, thereby ensuring the propagation of its genetic material into the next generation. Our bodies, in their intricate design, possess a multitude of fascinating and often peculiar features specifically adapted to facilitate mutual attraction. Consider, for example, the human lips. No other primate species exhibits lips quite like ours. If one were to observe the facial expressions of other apes, they would notice how these animals comically contort or invert their lips. From their perspective, it might seem as though humans constantly walk about with their lips permanently averted, a strange and unusual anatomical feature. Some researchers have put forth the hypothesis that our distinctive lips are connected to the specific needs of a human infant to suckle at the mother's breast. However, a chimpanzee infant, despite lacking anything remotely resembling human lips, manages to accomplish this task with remarkable, arguably superior efficiency. Clearly, then, another, more profound explanation must be at play. What is the evolutionary rationale for lips to possess such a distinctly demarcated form, characterized by such a sharp, unambiguous boundary separating them from the rest of the face? And here, an additional layer of intrigue presents itself. In individuals of lighter complexion, the lips are typically set apart by a pronounced contrast in color relative to the surrounding facial skin. However, in individuals with darker skin tones, this color contrast is often diminished or even entirely absent. If, indeed, lips play a crucial role as a biological signal, then nature, in its ingenious wisdom, would have presumably implemented a compensatory mechanism. And as is widely recognized, such a mechanism does, in fact, exist. In individuals with darker skin, the lips are often notably fuller, more robust, and more sharply delineated, thus ensuring their continued prominence as a visual signal. It appears, then, that lips serve as a subtle yet potent indicator to those in our social environment, but what precisely do they signal? It has long been understood, and numerous studies consistently corroborate this understanding, that full, well-defined lips are profoundly associated with femininity and with higher levels of female sex hormones. This, in turn, serves as a reliable, if unconscious, indicator of robust health and a strong capacity for fertility. Indeed, full, reddened lips are universally perceived as more attractive by the average male. This fundamental male predisposition has been intuitively grasped by women since time immemorial, leading to millennia of various artifices and enhancements designed to visually amplify the size and vibrancy of their lips, thereby creating a powerful, albeit often illusory, impression of heightened fecundity. In contemporary society, this is achieved through the application of lipsticks and, increasingly, through cosmetic injections. But from where, one might ponder, did this primal attraction originate? What lies at the root of the profound appeal of female lips for men? Prepare yourself, for this particular insight may prove rather provocative. Desmond Morris proposes that the explanation resides in certain rather piquant associations. If we were to cast our gaze upon our primate relatives, specific species, the mandrills, for instance, employ a striking evolutionary strategy known as the duplication of sexual signals. Male mandrills exhibit an identical combination of vibrant colors on both their sexual organs and their faces. This clever duplication allows the mandrill to render its sexual signals more conspicuously evident, essentially broadcasting its reproductive status with amplified clarity. A remarkably similar situation is observed in female baboons. These females display a distinctive pattern of markings on their ischial callosities, the hardened pads on their buttocks, and, curiously, on their chests. Morris postulates that this compensatory chest pattern evolved because baboons, unlike many of their ape relatives, spend a considerably greater proportion of their time in a seated posture. In such a sedentary lifestyle, the primary sexual signals located on the posterior would frequently be obscured, thus necessitating the development of a compensating visual cue on the chest. From these observations emerges the compelling hypothesis that at the pivotal juncture in our evolutionary history, when our ancestors definitively adopted bipedal locomotion, walking upright on two legs, a fundamental shift occurred. With the male's gaze now primarily directed at eye level, and with nothing else immediately presenting itself for observation other than the faces of females, the female face itself became subject to intense sexual selection. That is to say, males, often unconsciously, gravitated toward those females whose facial features evoked certain heartwarming associations, cues that subtly echoed other, more primal signals of fertility and sexual receptivity. This process of selective preference continued over generations, progressively shaping the facial anatomy of our species until it culminated in the distinctive feature we now recognize as human lips. But why do men also possess lips, you might reasonably inquire? The most probable explanation mirrors the reason why men too have nipples. Both males and females, in their initial developmental stages, are derived from an identical basic anatomical blueprint, a shared biological template before sexual differentiation becomes fully expressed. Additionally, lips also serve a universal function, common to both sexes. For chimpanzees, a kiss is primarily a gesture of greeting or reassurance. For humans, however, kissing has acquired a profound sexual dimension. Despite the fact that in some specific cultures, the practice of kissing on the lips is not universally customary or even accepted, Morris posits that kissing possesses an intrinsic, innate aspect. It serves a fundamental biological purpose, to enable us to assess the suitability of an individual as a potential mate, quite literally, to evaluate their taste. Thus, if you are ever complimented on being a good kisser, the truth is not that you possess some learned, masterful technique, for such a notion is somewhat nonsensical in this context. Rather, it simply indicates that your partner experiences profound pleasure in kissing you, an unconscious signal that their biological system has, in essence, deemed you an excellent candidate for the propagation of offspring. The inverse, unfortunately, also frequently occurs. One study, for instance, revealed that 59% of men and 66% of women reported a distinct loss of attraction to an individual after their very first kiss, underscoring the powerful, immediate, and often unconscious evaluative function of this intimate act. Given that romantic partners frequently engage in kissing, often and extensively, it is evolutionarily advantageous to possess sensitive mucous membranes on the body that are perpetually exposed. This ensures that, during kissing, there is no need to expend muscular effort to maintain tension in the mouth, allowing for effortless and continuous contact. However, Morris then raises the stakes, so to speak, in his analysis, as he posits that the distinctive form of the female breast shares a remarkable number of parallels with the evolutionary history of human lips. It is commonly held that the female breast possesses its characteristic shape primarily for the purpose of nourishing offspring. Yet, practical observation demonstrates that this particular form is, surprisingly, not optimally designed for the most efficient or comfortable feeding of an infant. One can readily confirm this by considering the design evolution of baby bottles, whose shape has, in fact, been meticulously refined over time, specifically for their intended purpose of infant feeding. The nipple of a baby bottle is considerably longer and does not transition into a large, firm, hemispherical structure that might potentially compress an infant's nose, thereby almost obstructing the flow of oxygen. If one directs their attention to the animal kingdom, particularly to our closest relatives, the chimpanzees, it becomes evident that the mammary glands of female chimpanzees are far more akin to the utilitarian form of a baby bottle. Even during periods of full lactation, their breasts remain relatively flat compared to human female breasts, and their nipples are considerably longer. It becomes evident that the mammary glands of female chimpanzees are far more akin to the utilitarian form of a baby bottle. Even during periods of full lactation, their breasts remain relatively flat compared to human female breasts, and their nipples are considerably longer. In his later work, a book titled The Human Zoo, Morris advances a truly provocative hypothesis concerning the female breast, a notion so striking that, if you are currently standing, you might consider taking a seat. He suggests that based purely on their distinct form, human female breasts evolved as an imitation, indeed a striking mimicry, of the buttocks. Much like the situation with lips, this hypothesis traces its roots back to the distant era, when our ancestors navigated their world on four limbs. This anatomical resemblance, Morris argues, provided the female with a novel and potent means of broadcasting a sexual signal, one that she could deploy while standing upright, in the uniquely human bipedal posture, directly facing a male. This is an undeniably extravagant hypothesis, requiring a significant leap in understanding. If this hypothesis holds true, or is at least partially valid, it would by extension offer a plausible explanation for why human females, on average, possess significantly less body hair than human males. A pronounced, voluptuous breast formation on a female body, already covered in a dense coat of fur, would be considerably less visually distinct, less effective as a sexually appealing cue for a male. Therefore, it is conceivable that males, over countless generations, selectively favored females with less pronounced body hair, thereby enhancing the visibility and impact of these buttocks-mimicking breast signals. Males, conversely, lacked an equivalent anatomical feature on their torsos to enhance through hair reduction, leading women to be somewhat more tolerant of male body hair. However, bipedal locomotion also left an indelible mark on male physiology. As our ancestors straightened their posture and began to walk upright on two legs, the reproductive organs of human males were, for the first time, openly and consistently exposed to public view. Consequently, in the era preceding the advent of clothing, these organs themselves became subject to selective pressures, now influenced by the preferences of human females. This unique evolutionary trajectory is believed to be a contributing factor to why Homo sapiens, among all other primates, possesses not only the largest brain, but also the largest male reproductive organ relative to body size. The array of physiological features within the bodies of naked apes, specifically those that facilitate mutual attraction between sexes, is by no means exhausted by the examples we have just explored. At the onset of sexual maturation, human females undergo not only an enlargement of the breasts, but also a noticeable widening of the hips. Wider hips, as is widely understood, serve a critical biological function, providing the necessary pelvic structure to accommodate and safely carry a developing fetus to term. Concurrently, in males, puberty triggers a significant increase in muscle mass, and they experience a broadening of the shoulders. The adaptive advantages of these developments, increased strength and a more imposing physique in males, associated with protection and resource acquisition, and enhanced reproductive capacity in females, are largely self-evident. Yet, a more perplexing question arises: what is the evolutionary purpose behind the notably pronounced growth of hair in the armpits and genital regions of both men and women? Within our bodies, we possess specialized glands known as apocrine glands. These glands, distinct from the eccrine glands responsible for cooling the skin, are predominantly concentrated in the armpits and the genital area. Apocrine glands become active at puberty and, significantly, during moments of sexual arousal. At these times, they intensely secrete a unique substance that, through the metabolic activity of bacteria residing on the skin, acquires a distinctive and often potent scent. The prevailing hypothesis, then, suggests that the hair in these specific regions serves a crucial function to effectively trap and retain this unique olfactory signal, thereby amplifying its presence and ensuring its diffusion. It is interesting to note that, in lower mammals, the male often sniffs the female more frequently than she sniffs him prior to copulation, an evident olfactory assessment. And while the precise role of pheromones in human behavior remains a subject of ongoing scientific debate, requiring further extensive research to fully elucidate, it is perhaps universally acknowledged among us the powerful and indelible influence of scents. How profoundly they embed themselves in our memory, capable of transporting us across vast spans of time and experience. One might, for instance, encounter a particular perfume in a crowded thoroughfare after a decade or more, and instantly recognize that specific scent, triggering a cascade of associated memories and emotions. We intuitively understand that each sex possesses its own unique bodily scent. A compelling hypothesis has been advanced, suggesting that a fundamental component of the pair bonding process, the very essence of what we term falling in love, involves a specific form of olfactory imprinting. This phenomenon entails the deep and indelible memorization of a partner's unique body odor, associating it intrinsically with feelings of affection, security, and attraction. Furthermore, complementary research indicates that the specific scent of a person can, at an unconscious level, signal their genetic suitability for procreation. When you find the body odor of a partner genuinely appealing, it may be your organism subtly signaling to you that any potential offspring you share would benefit from a robust and diverse immune system, a crucial advantage in the evolutionary struggle for survival. But, of course, humans cannot simply sniff one another and immediately proceed to procreate, as many other animal species are observed to do. There are complex social rituals, intricate layers of interaction that must first unfold, beginning, at the very least, with an introduction. How did our distant ancestors, in the absence of modern dating applications or the classified sections of newspapers, navigate this initial, delicate phase? How do we even now, in our natural habitats, form pair bonds? Do we, like other animals, possess certain inherent, pre-programmed algorithms that guide us in the intricate dance of seeking and attracting partners? While we are undeniably creatures of immense complexity, operating on multiple levels of conscious and unconscious thought, certain innate patterns of behavior indeed persist. As with numerous other species, the initial stage of human pair formation is often characterized by a delicate and somewhat contradictory interplay of behaviors. Apprehension and a degree of inherent aggression often clash with the potent force of sexual attraction. If the reciprocal sexual signals exchanged between individuals are sufficiently strong, then the initial nervousness and uncertainty gradually dissipate, giving way to a more confident and assured interaction. I shall illustrate this by examining the intricate process of human introductions, Many among you will likely be surprised to learn that a substantial body of research consistently indicates that, contrary to popular belief and ingrained cultural narratives, the initiation of acquaintance among humans, in the overwhelming majority of instances, is not primarily driven by men, but rather by women. It is women who subtly, and often unconsciously, transmit a specific suite of signals to which men in turn react. The stronger a woman's attraction to a particular man, the higher the probability that she will direct these subtle, flirtatious cues towards him. The individual who initiates flirting is, in essence, transmitting signals of their sexual availability and receptivity, simultaneously anticipating a reciprocal display of interest as a prelude to further engagement. It is, of course, undeniable that flirtatious behavior is, to a significant extent, shaped by cultural norms and established traditions. However, a fascinating subset of these signals transcends such cultural conditioning, proving to be absolutely universal, an intrinsic component of human nature itself. This means that individuals do not consciously learn these behaviors. Rather, they emerge spontaneously, independently of formal instruction. Regardless of the continent upon which such research is conducted, or the specific societal context examined, people exhibit remarkably similar patterns of flirtatious interaction. So you may be wondering, what are these universally understood signals? I shall highlight the most overt and simultaneously the most potent of these cues, the gaze. You yourself are undoubtedly aware of the profound difficulty inherent in averting one's gaze from an individual to whom you are drawn. It is a powerful, almost magnetic force of attraction. Naturally, we all engage in mutual observation, with women scrutinizing men they find appealing, and men similarly observing women who capture their interest. However, research consistently demonstrates that men do not frequently approach women from whom they perceive no signals of reciprocal interest, even if they find that woman particularly attractive. This perhaps is not entirely surprising, reflecting a cautious assessment of potential rejection. Conversely, a woman whom a man might initially have overlooked or scarcely noticed can sometimes begin to capture his attention and interest after he begins to intercept her lingering glances, receiving these subtle yet potent, nonverbal cues. Men and women, as a general rule, tend to possess a remarkably poor conscious awareness of the intricate, often subliminal, processes through which these initial attractions unfold. Women often perceive themselves as having merely been seated, entirely minding their own affairs, while men often interpret their actions as having simply identified a target and pursued it without perceived impediment. Yet, within the intricate architecture of our brains, specialized neurons exist. These neurons activate and transmit a signal to our conscious awareness, specifically when an individual situated in the periphery of our visual field directs their gaze directly at us. This finely tuned system operates with such remarkable precision that if the person observing us shifts their gaze by even a mere 1 or 2 degrees, these specialized neurons immediately cease their activity, the signal of direct observation abruptly ceasing. This astonishing capacity for precise gaze detection has been rendered possible, in no small part, due to a unique characteristic of human eyes, a feature unparalleled across the entire spectrum of the animal kingdom, the presence of white sclera. This prominent white surrounding the iris allows us to effortlessly and accurately discern the precise direction of another person's gaze. We perceive the sensation of being observed, feeling the weight of another's eyes upon us, and instinctively, our own gaze is drawn towards that individual. If the person in question evokes a sense of sympathy or attraction within us, that initial brief glance evolves into a prolonged, often repeated, exchange of mutual eye contact. Should a woman, during a moment of sustained mutual gaze, then lower her eyes and offer a shy, slightly embarrassed smile, the ethologist Renee, studying such patterns, would instantly recognize this as a widely prevalent and frequently replicated courtship algorithm among naked apes. This intricate sequence of interactions, the initial mutual gaze, the lowered eyes, the soft, hesitant smile, recurs with remarkable consistency across diverse human societies, particularly in contexts where individuals are permitted the freedom to engage in spontaneous social interaction. Therefore, once again, let us consider what has just transpired, but this time, from the detached perspective of our hypothetical extraterrestrial observer. What, precisely, is a smile, and why do men react so profoundly to it, especially when coupled with the gesture of lowered eyes? This is not merely some romanticized trope from a melodrama. Both are universally recognized, instinctive expressions of emotion deeply rooted in our shared human nature. Let us commence with the smile itself. The social smile, a gesture distinct from a mere reflex, typically emerges in human infants by approximately the end of their second month of life. The very existence of this uniquely human smile, surprisingly, finds its explanation in the absence of our ancestral fur. When an infant experiences a profound sense of loneliness or isolation, an instinctive, pre-programmed reaction is triggered within them, a biological imperative designed to compel the mother to reduce the physical distance between them. More simply put, the infant cries. This primal reaction bears a striking resemblance to similar distress signals observed in other primate species. However, when a primate infant emits such a cry, its mother immediately responds by retrieving and clutching her offspring to her body, a grip the infant then instinctively maintains. The human infant, as we have already established, is physically unable to maintain such a persistent grip due to a lack of both strength and a suitable furry surface. Yet, the human baby possesses no less profound a need for maternal warmth, for the deep comfort of physical closeness. Consequently, nature, in its ingenious adaptiveness, was compelled to devise an alternative mechanism. A signal was needed that would reward the mother, indicating to her that all was well, that her child simply desired her continued presence and comfort. Thus, the smile emerged. It is no mere coincidence that mothers derive such profound pleasure from the sight of their infant's smile, finding themselves captivated by its innocent radiance. This deeply satisfying response is the direct outcome of evolutionary programming, designed to strengthen the maternal bond and ensure continued care. As an individual matures, the function and complexity of the smile subtly evolve. In social interactions, one never possesses absolute certainty regarding the precise reaction one is eliciting from others, and this inherent uncertainty can often generate a degree of apprehension. The smile in this more complex social context serves a dual purpose. It signals the existence of this apprehension while simultaneously conveying benevolent intentions. It acts as a subtle appeasing gesture, a nonverbal assurance that one harbors no aggressive designs. In essence, it functions as a mechanism to mollify, to de-escalate potential tension, and thereby diminish the likelihood of an aggressive interaction. So returning to our courtship scenario, the smile is an instinctive reaction through which a young woman communicates a sense of gentle awkwardness, coupled with an underlying disposition of goodwill and openness. However, the act of lowering the eyes or casting one's gaze downwards is an even more intriguing gesture, laden with deeper evolutionary significance. This action is, quite unexpectedly, a direct derivative of the submissive postures inherently present in primates. Among our primate relatives, the act of lowering oneself to the ground, often accompanied by averted eyes or a bowed head, is a clear and unequivocal demonstration of submission and deference. One might immediately object, "Oh, come now. Why would women in a modern context demonstrate subservience to men?" And surely, there's a vast chasm between prostrating oneself on the ground and merely lowering one's eyes. This seems an excessive stretch of the argument, but I urge patience. Let us not hasten to judgment. It is also interesting to consider the evolution of the bow as a formalized social greeting, from its primal origins in the primate tendency to prostrate oneself in fear. The fundamental essence of both, however, lies in the deliberate act of lowering the face or averting the gaze. Regardless of how restrained or ritualized the bow may have become due to social conventions, its core meaning invariably implies an inclination to lower the head or the eyes. Primates, through gestures like the bow, specifically demonstrate their loyalty, and, in doing so, effectively reduce any anxiety or suspicion harbored by the dominant individual within the group. Humans, it must be remembered, are primates too. Our unique characteristic, as previously noted, is the distinct white sclera of our eyes, which allows for the phenomenal precision in reading the direction of another's gaze. Consequently, for humans to convey the same signal of deference or submission, merely a slight lowering of the eyes suffices, an action that carries a powerful ancient message. I do not believe that in the context of courtship or social interaction, this gesture necessarily implies self-abasement on the part of women. Firstly, we are, after all, speaking of the evolutionary origins of this gesture. In its modern manifestation, it clearly does not possess the same potent force as its primal archetype. Secondly, men, too, occasionally experience shyness and lower their eyes, demonstrating a similar, albeit perhaps less culturally emphasized, response. However, if we focus on women, it is a biological reality that they are uniquely vulnerable during pregnancy and for an extended period thereafter. Due to this immense, inherent natural susceptibility, women are predisposed to favor partners who exhibit qualities of greater strength, emotional stability, competence, and, ultimately, higher social status, and often, greater physical height than themselves. This preference reflects a deep-seated, biological need to feel protected and secure. Often, even the most independent and capable women harbor this desire, simply because both sexes, on average, exhibit different priorities when selecting a partner for a long-term relationship. This phenomenon is supported by a vast body of research conducted across dozens of diverse cultures. These studies consistently reveal that both men and women generally prefer attractive partners. However, while men, on average, would typically favor a younger woman over a wealthy and educated one, women, conversely, are, on average, quite readily willing to accept a man who is older, provided he is better educated and more financially secure than they are. Consequently, the more educated a woman becomes, and the higher her income, the more challenging it often becomes for her to find a partner who meets her evolved preferences. For men, the opposite trend generally holds true. Furthermore, some research suggests that if, within a family unit, the woman begins to earn significantly more than the man, the probability of divorce tends to notably increase. Thus, it is evident that the average woman, often unconsciously, desires to perceive a certain protective, even paternalistic, quality in her male partner. This is why attributes such as timidity, shyness, and modesty are often culturally deemed intrinsically feminine, while confidence, ambition, and a propensity for risk-taking are traditionally associated with masculinity. The underlying reasons for these deeply ingrained perceptions will become even clearer as we proceed. In the moments preceding an acquaintance, by smiling and lowering her eyes, a woman subtly signals that this particular man is potentially suitable for a role to which she would be willing to yield. This signal of deference or appeasement effectively dampens any latent apprehension in the man. Recall the behavior of primates, instantly imbuing him with the courage required to approach her. It is far more common for men to approach women than the inverse, a pattern that persists even in highly liberal societies, where women's initiative is not outwardly condemned. This enduring pattern exists because, despite all the progressive shifts of modernity, it remains profoundly challenging to override the deep currents of our biology. Compared to other animal species, the process of pair formation in humans, encompassing all stages from the initial acquaintance to the act of copulation, typically unfolds over an extraordinarily protracted period. This can span hours, days, weeks, and sometimes even many months. The progression through these various stages is, as a general rule, largely controlled by women, for men are typically inclined and prepared to advance through all stages as immediately as possible. This appears, at first glance, to be a rather peculiar phenomenon. Why would women deliberately impede the realization of the primary biological imperative shared by every living organism, the imperative to reproduce? What is the purpose of these elaborate courtship rituals, these intricate ceremonies? One might argue that it is not so much the development of civilization that has altered our modern sexual behavior, but rather that our fundamental sexual behavior has profoundly shaped the very forms that civilization has adopted. Most ape species do not form stable monogamous pair bonds, and among our closest relatives, the great apes, absolutely none exhibit such behavior, with the notable exception of our own species. The fundamental reason for this lies in the fact that, in comparison to any other primate, the human infant makes extraordinarily high demands upon its parents. Many years are required before a human child can achieve a rudimentary level of self-sufficiency, and throughout this prolonged developmental period, the child will remain profoundly dependent on the consistent care and unwavering protection of both parents. And here a truly paradoxical situation emerges. What is the fundamental overarching law of evolution? To transmit the maximum possible number of copies of one's genes into the succeeding generation. From this perspective, a male's optimal strategy would be to seek out and mate with as many attractive, fertile young females as possible. And, if he is a sought-after partner among the opposite sex, his physiology permits him to engage in this activity, theoretically, an almost unlimited number of times. This particular evolutionary drive might explain why some men, even when in committed relationships, find it exceedingly difficult to resist the allure of other potential mates. For a woman, however, such a reproductive strategy is utterly devoid of any biological sense. At a minimum, she must endure the demanding period of gestation, carrying the child within her body, and subsequently, she must invest a significant amount of time and energy in nursing the infant. Throughout this entire period, she is biologically incapable of conceiving again. Moreover, unlike the male, her reproductive window is finite, constrained by age. Thus, if, under ideal conditions, a male might theoretically father hundreds of offspring in his lifetime, a woman is typically limited to producing, at most, perhaps 12 children. Consequently, from the perspective of reproduction, a woman cannot afford the luxury of indiscriminately engaging with multiple partners. This fundamental biological disparity partly explains why human societies tend to be less tolerant of sexually promiscuous women, while often exhibiting a more reserved or even accepting attitude towards men who engage in similar behavior. So what is a woman to do? How can she maximize her evolutionary success, ensuring the transmission of the greatest possible number of her genes into the next generation? Her optimal strategy in this complex biological calculus is to seek out the most desirable, most reproductively successful male, the one with whom the maximum number of other women also wish to mate and to bear him a son. By doing so, there is a high probability that her son, inheriting the advantageous traits and characteristics of his father, will also become highly sought after by the opposite sex. It is he, then, who will be capable of transmitting a large number of her genes into the subsequent generation. However, there is a critical nuance, an important proviso, in this strategy. The woman must select not merely a man who is popular with other women. Her chosen partner must also exhibit a certain independence, and it is absolutely crucial that he not become fixated on any single woman, including, of course, herself. This is because personality traits and behavioral predispositions are, to a certain extent, also inherited. What, after all, would be the benefit of her son being highly desirable to numerous women if, ultimately, like his father, he were to choose only one exclusive partner? This complex and intriguing concept is known as the attractive son hypothesis, and, in turn, this hypothesis offers a compelling explanation for the paradoxical attraction some women feel towards men who, suspiciously, do not resemble exemplary fathers and are utterly unlike good husbands. We are speaking in essence of the bad boys of the human species. This hypothesis could account for the pervasive hope some women harbor that they can tame or reform such men, and the subsequent disillusionment that often follows, regardless of the ultimate outcome. It might even explain why these women at times experience anger or frustration with themselves, fully comprehending the apparent absurdity of their choices, yet remaining utterly bewildered as to why they are not drawn to normal, non-narcissistic men. If this hypothesis is even partially valid, then such seemingly contradictory behavior would, in fact, present no paradox whatsoever. Because, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, a good, loyal, and nurturing man is, by definition, a less effective disseminator of genes across a broad spectrum, and any son he fathers would likely inherit similar traits, potentially limiting his own reproductive success. Thus, on one hand, we encounter these idealized, highly optimized reproductive strategies for men and women. On the other hand, we are confronted with the stark reality that, for the naked ape, these conceptual models of behavior often prove highly dysfunctional in practice. In the distant past, a woman who chose a philandering male risked being abandoned, left alone to raise a child. In the unforgiving crucible of the wild, such a predicament was often tantamount to a death sentence for the infant, and frequently for the mother herself. As previously mentioned, the rearing of a human infant demands an enormous expenditure of resources that, in the pre-civilized era, a woman could rarely acquire independently. This implies that both the genes of such a woman and the genes of such a promiscuous male would, in reality, have lost the evolutionary race. Therefore, evolution was compelled to forge a compromise, to find a workable, albeit imperfect, solution, and, indeed, a compromise was found. It is by no means perfect. The dynamics between the sexes are often riddled with contradictions, which is hardly surprising when one considers that evolution is a blind, trial-and-error mechanism, a ceaseless process of experimentation rather than deliberate design. This is readily understood through a less abstract example. In the United States alone, approximately 5,000 individuals tragically die each year from choking, a stark illustration of an evolutionary design flaw. So, for men and women to successfully rear a child, evolution endowed them with an extraordinary and somewhat peculiar biological program, a program whose very existence some still find difficult to accept. But let us proceed systematically. The male hunter was compelled to develop an innate drive, an imperative akin to that of a wolf, to bring sustenance back to the familial unit, to his offspring and to his mate. The female, due to the extraordinarily prolonged period required for child-rearing, the immense physical and emotional demands of motherhood, and her comparatively less robust physique, was largely unable to engage in the dangerous and physically demanding pursuit of hunting large game. Indeed, the total muscle mass in men is a significant 61% greater than that in women. It must be noted, of course, that women could and did participate in hunting activities, but it is unlikely that this was a systematic or primary endeavor. Hunting was inherently dangerous, and societies that failed to adequately protect their fertile women quickly perished, because the number of potential offspring within a population is far more dependent on the number of fertile females than on the number of fertile males. This fundamental demographic reality is easily illustrated with a simple thought experiment. Imagine two isolated islands. On one island, there is a single man and 10 women. On the other, there is a single woman and 10 men. The question is, on which island would there be a greater number of children after 1 year? The answer is clearly the first island. Therefore, the imperative to protect women is likely a deeply ingrained genetic predisposition in men. You are probably familiar with stories of men risking their lives for an unfamiliar woman, tales that resonate with this protective instinct. A frequently cited example in support of this hypothesis is the tragic sinking of the Titanic, from which 75% of the women passengers were saved, compared to only about 25% of the men. The majority of those who perished were young men who, regardless of their social class, educational attainment, or ethnic origin, voluntarily relinquished their places in the lifeboats to women, children, and the elderly. This occurred despite the obvious fact that no one could have forcibly prevented them from saving themselves had they chosen to do so. Of course, not every man acted with such gallantry, but the data clearly indicates this was the behavior of the majority. It is truly astonishing to consider that within you reside genes that prioritize not your individual well-being, but the welfare and perpetuation of the species itself. In summation, while men primarily engaged in hunting and women largely focused on childcare, it appears that the bulk of caloric intake, particularly carbohydrates, was brought in by women, who gathered fruits, berries, roots, honey, and other readily available plant-based foods. Men, by contrast, contributed meat, rich in essential protein. This particular kind of paternal instinct, this active involvement in providing for offspring, represents a relatively new trait in our evolutionary history. The common characteristic among primates is that almost all parental care is exclusively provided by the mother. The concept of hunting groups composed exclusively of males presented a significant departure from the prevailing trends among primates. For an adult male primate to embark on a foraging expedition, leaving his females unprotected and vulnerable to the attention of other nearby males, was, at the time, an almost unheard of and counterintuitive behavior. Clearly, mere cultural injunctions would have been insufficient to counteract such powerful biological drives. One cannot simply convince someone not to engage in certain behaviors, especially when powerful instincts are at play. Moreover, the eminent American evolutionary psychologist David Buss discovered that women, when in relationships, exhibit a propensity to cultivate male friends who, consciously or unconsciously, are regarded as backup options. This behavior, on one hand, might be explained by the high mortality rate of men during hunting expeditions in the distant past. A genetic program might still operate within women, designed to ensure a viable alternative in the event that her primary partner does not return from the hunt. Of course, not all women exhibit this tendency, but it represents a discernible pattern, the existence of which can be explained by the fact that women whose ancestors possessed this trait would have had additional opportunities to pass their genes into the future. On the other hand, the phenomenon might also be explained by what is termed the strategic pluralism hypothesis, proposed by psychology professors Stephen Gangestad and Jeffrey Simpson. This hypothesis posits that human females evolved a strategy of dual mating, whereby they might seek high-quality genes from one male, while simultaneously securing care and investment in their offspring from another. Further support for the dual mating hypothesis comes from data suggesting that, statistically, women are most prone to infidelity precisely during ovulation, that is, when conception is most probable. However, research conducted by the aforementioned David Buss and his team casts considerable doubt upon the widespread applicability of this hypothesis. Their findings indicate that only approximately 23% of children born into families are, in fact, fathered by men other than the assumed partner. Something, it appears, prevents the majority of women from, purely for pragmatic reasons, sharing their intimate lives with two men. This something is precisely that profound shift that occurred in the very nature of our ancestors. A change embedded at the genetic level, that novel, peculiar genetic program. And here, it must be emphasized, we are not speaking of lofty moral principles. The evolutionary process does not operate within such ethical categories. When the burden on a single parent becomes excessively arduous across diverse animal societies, be it fish, birds, or mammals, a robust pair bond emerges, uniting parents of both sexes throughout the entire period of rearing their young. This is precisely what transpired with the hunter ape. Both sexes were compelled to develop a biological program of mutual attachment, a deep connection that we term sexual imprinting, or, in common parlance, falling in love. And all these elaborate courtship rituals, these intricate ceremonies that we observe, serve a vital purpose: to allow sufficient time for this profound state of infatuation, this deep emotional imprinting, to fully coalesce and solidify. Undoubtedly, many of you have experienced this phenomenon firsthand, that intense desire for one particular individual, who may not be outwardly flawless, nor exceptionally beautiful, yet, inexplicably, no other person, even one objectively considered more attractive or otherwise desirable, suddenly holds any interest for you. This is sexual imprinting or stamping in, a process whereby certain characteristics of a partner, their voice, their scent, their eyes, their eyebrows, their hair, their lips, their specific mannerisms, become indelibly etched into your neural pathways, forever associated with attraction and desire. So profound is this imprinting that, should the unfortunate circumstance arise where a relationship with the object of your infatuation does not materialize, you may even find yourself unconsciously seeking out those very same traits in subsequent partners, a testament to the enduring power of this deeply ingrained biological program. Indeed, so potent can sexual imprinting be that cases of unrequited love sometimes tragically culminate in individuals taking their own lives, highlighting the profound emotional and psychological grip of this biological imperative. It is intriguing to note that, as research suggests, men tend to fall in love earlier than women. This disparity is likely connected to the fact that women, due to their greater biological investment in reproduction, must exercise more meticulous discretion in their choice of a partner. Conversely, while men may fall in love more quickly, women tend to sustain their infatuation for a shorter duration. That is to say, women fall in love later, and their infatuation typically subsides more rapidly. From the perspective of the species, it appears to be more advantageous for the male to remain attached for a longer period. I wish to underscore that we are here speaking specifically of romantic infatuation. Deeper feelings of mutual respect, genuine interest, a profound sense of shared commitment, and unwavering loyalty can and often do endure between partners for an entire lifetime. However, such sustained, profound connection requires the cultivation of truly elevated qualities. If, however, we focus solely on the phenomenon of infatuation, then all those sentimental, saccharine love songs so pervasive in popular culture, some of which, I must confess, I find personally endearing, exist only because, in the distant past, hunter-gatherer ancestors needed to successfully raise their offspring. Thanks to this very phenomenon of infatuation, partners maintain fidelity during periods of separation, a behavior that, as Desmond Morris observes, is relatively rare among other primate species. In essence, through the development of this biological program, partners, presuming the existence of mutual affection, could confidently rely on one another. Females became secure in the support provided by their male counterparts, allowing them to dedicate themselves peacefully to their maternal duties. Males, in turn, could now venture forth on hunts, confident in the loyalty of their mates, thereby avoiding potentially dangerous conflicts with rivals who might otherwise attempt to usurp their position. Of course, infatuation alone was not sufficient. Women are physiologically receptive to conception for only a brief window of time, a period known as ovulation. Consequently, engaging in sexual relations outside of this fertile window would, from a purely reproductive standpoint, constitute a wasteful expenditure of energy and resources. However, such relations become an absolute necessity from the perspective of maintaining and strengthening the pair bond within a monogamous system. Therefore, unlike many other species, human females are receptive to their partner's advances at any time, even during pregnancy. This implies that sexual relations serve a purpose far beyond mere procreation. As we can discern, this is not a reflection of the depravity of modern civilization, but rather a deeply ingrained, biologically justified, and evolutionarily rational tendency inherent to our species. Thanks to this complex interplay of factors, children were assured of care and attention, at least during the most vulnerable period of their lives. I have already alluded to the fact that nature, in its intricate design, compels women to exercise greater selectivity when choosing a male partner. Desmond Morris proposes an intriguing hypothesis regarding the hymen, an anatomical attribute that, from the perspective of species propagation, might otherwise appear entirely nonsensical, perhaps even detrimental, given that it physically impedes the very act of procreation. Morris posits that this specific female physiological feature evolved to ensure that a woman would only engage in sexual relations with a partner for whom such a minor physical impediment would be utterly inconsequential, a testament to his determination and commitment. For men, female virginity was, in turn, attractive because it served as an additional indicator of the bride's discerning selectivity. This was profoundly important because a man, unlike a woman, could never be absolutely certain that a child was genetically his. From an evolutionary perspective, expending time and resources on protecting and nourishing offspring that did not carry one's own genes represented a costly error. Consequently, men who were not prone to jealousy or suspicion would have, demonstrably, transmitted their genes less frequently. For women, such a fundamental uncertainty regarding paternity is, by biological principle, non-existent. This is likely another contributing factor to why societies tend to be less tolerant of sexually promiscuous women than of men who engage in similar behavior. This societal disparity persists even now, despite the widespread availability of contraception and paternity tests, demonstrating the enduring power of biological predispositions that are challenging to override. On the other hand, Women also face a considerable danger. The male partner might abandon her during pregnancy or after the birth of the child. Consequently, women too are prone to suspicion and jealousy, reflecting their own evolutionary pressures to secure male investment. Regardless, the precise details of these hypotheses regarding the hymen, while potentially contributing to our evolutionary trajectory, do not entirely clarify its origin, especially given its presence in a number of other animal species. Some theories suggest it functions as a protective barrier against microbes and dirt. Overall, however, it remains one of the more significant enigmas of female anatomy. Nevertheless, one remarkably harsh evolutionary mechanism lends significant credence to the idea that nature indeed predisposes human females to exercise extreme caution in the selection of a sexual partner. Despite the fact that the vast majority of violent crimes are perpetrated by men, the act of killing one's own children is, surprisingly, more frequently committed by women. Research conducted across diverse cultures has consistently shown that a mother may inflict death upon her newborn infant due to a profound scarcity of resources and a critical lack of male support. A study undertaken in Italy, which meticulously analyzed 110 cases of neonaticide, the killing of a newborn by its mother, unequivocally demonstrated that these acts were predominantly carried out by relatively young, impoverished women who lacked a stable partner. Crucially, these women exhibited no discernible psychopathology. The authors of the study posited that such maternal behavior represents an evolutionarily conditioned, adaptive strategy, one that emerged in the distant past, designed, to quote directly, to increase the mother's biological fitness by eliminating an undesirable newborn and conserving resources for future offspring born under more favorable conditions. Modern legislation in many countries has been compelled to acknowledge this deep biological reality. For instance, in Russia, the killing of a newborn child by its mother is classified as a distinct offense within the criminal code, and the penalties associated with this particular article are significantly less severe than those for general homicide. Fortunately, in contemporary society, such tragic occurrences are not common. It might, to some, seem that this monologue places an undue emphasis on women. However, it is precisely women who exert the most profound influence on the evolutionary trajectory of our species. This is a matter of pure biological mathematics. Recall that the number of children in a population is determined by the number of fertile females, that is, those capable of bearing children, not by the number of fertile males. From the perspective of reproduction, and in the context of evolution, nothing is more crucial. Fertile males are, in essence, an almost inexhaustible resource. Fertile females, conversely, are a significantly limited resource. This fundamental asymmetry persists even when the numbers of men and women are ostensibly equal, a balance that is itself a product of its own straightforward mathematics. Even with an equal gender ratio, competition for fertile women will invariably be higher. Undeniably, there are highly successful men with a vast array of potential partners, men who are in a position to choose freely. Similarly, there are women who unfortunately find themselves with no choices at all. However, if we consider average values, it remains a consistent truth that for the average fertile woman, there will always be more men competing for her attention than there are women competing for the average man. And therefore, the average woman possesses a greater degree of selectivity in choosing a partner than the average man. There is data, which certainly requires further refinement and verification, yet it exists, suggesting that approximately only half of all men who have ever lived on this planet successfully left behind offspring. It is for this very reason that we speak of women conducting sexual selection, and that it is predominantly women who exert a profound influence on the evolutionary modifications of our species. Therefore, from this perspective, their role in shaping human biology and behavior is of paramount interest. It might also appear that an excessive emphasis is placed on the intricacies of intersexual relationships. Yet, understanding this aspect is profoundly important. If you direct your attention to the organizational structure of our dwellings today, you will observe that the fundamental framework of our lives has, remarkably, not deviated in the slightest since the era of our ancestors. It continues, as it always has, to be defined by our ancient, deeply ingrained biological imperative to compartmentalize our living spaces into distinct, individual family territories. Even the most expansive residential structures are meticulously subdivided into separate units, one allocated to each family. This arrangement does not strike you as unusual, does it? Residential structures are meticulously subdivided into separate units, one allocated to each family. This arrangement does not strike you as unusual, does it? Indeed, it likely feels inherently right, a natural and expected order of things. However, in reality, you perceive this as the appropriate arrangement precisely because your biology compels you to think this way, a biology meticulously sculpted over millions of years of evolution. In theory, countless alternative methods of human societal organization could exist, yet we consistently organize ourselves in this very specific manner. Consider, for example, the widespread phenomenon of private homes. They are almost invariably encircled by fences, walls, or carefully cultivated hedges, creating distinct boundaries that physically and symbolically separate them from neighboring properties. These dividing lines are rigorously observed, and the boundaries are respected, much as they are among other territorial animals. For the naked ape, it is critically important that its dwelling be uniquely identifiable among the others. People will go to extraordinary lengths to ensure their lair stands out. Why, one might ask, is this so crucial? Consider the strong reactions often expressed in the comments sections of videos featuring interior designers, where individuals lament that modern apartments frequently resemble identical, soulless office spaces. This widespread dissatisfaction underscores a deep-seated need for personalization. Homes or apartments are extensively adorned internally, filled to capacity with a diverse array of decorative items, trinkets, and personal artifacts. Such actions are typically explained as an effort to imbue the living space with a sense of coziness or individuality. In essence, these behaviors are remarkably analogous to the actions of other territorial animals, who meticulously mark out the perimeters of their dens or lairs. If you affix a plaque bearing your name to your front door, or if you suspend a painting on your wall, you are, to translate your actions into the language of canines or wolves, quite simply lifting your leg and leaving your distinctive mark upon that space. Reflecting upon all these observations, we come to a profound realization. Our species has remained, to a far greater extent than we might initially have imagined, profoundly committed to its fundamental biological instincts. Our primate sexual system, infused with adaptations borrowed from carnivorous lineages, has remained remarkably intact, stubbornly persisting despite all our astounding advancements in technology. If one were to take a group of 20 contemporary nuclear families and transplant them into a primeval subtropical environment where the males would be compelled to hunt for sustenance, the sexual structure of this nascent community would, in all likelihood, require either very minimal readjustment or, astonishingly, no alteration whatsoever. Contrary to the imaginative narrative spun by science fiction writers, human beings have not evolved to live in vast, communal families, to share spouses indiscriminately, or to consign newborn infants to specialized child-rearing institutions, and all other such theoretical societal configurations. Embarking on journeys to the moon, the space-age ape still meticulously carries photographs of its spouse and offspring in its wallet, a testament to the enduring power of the pair bond. Thus, on one hand, we observe that the vast majority of human societies across the planet organize themselves around family units centered on pair bonds. This strongly indicates that this phenomenon possesses a fundamentally biological foundation. Yet, on the other hand, the very mechanism of pair formation is evidently imperfect. As Morris suggests, it had to be, in essence, stitched onto the pre-existing primate social system, and the seam, the point of juncture, remains visibly apparent even today. And if the marital union encounters difficulties, these ancient ape-like instincts reassert themselves. For instance, according to research conducted by the previously mentioned evolutionary psychologist David Buss and his team, approximately 50% of men and 30 to 40% of women engage in infidelity, betraying their partners. Beyond this, many facets of our culture stem directly from these unchanging, deep-seated instincts. Consider this. Given that so much of our physiology and behavior evolved to attract and retain a partner, once that partner has been successfully secured, there arises a new imperative to take measures that effectively discourage the attraction of others, thereby preserving the stability of the family unit. In other social animal species that form pair bonds, this is primarily achieved through aggressive displays or territorial marking. However, for a cooperative species like ours, such radical measures are generally less desirable. Due to our adoption of bipedal locomotion, the naked ape is physically unable to approach another member of its species without, quite unintentionally, displaying its sexual attributes. Other primates who move on all fours do not encounter this particular challenge. If they wish to display their sexual organs, they must adopt a specific posture. We, however, are, in a sense, perpetually in this display posture. Consequently, Morris posits that the act of covering the genitalia with a piece of fabric was likely one of humanity's very earliest inventions. Only later, when our ancestors began to settle in regions with less hospitable climates, did they begin to utilize clothing for protection against the cold. But this secondary function emerged considerably later in our history. Therefore, clothing, in its primary evolutionary function, was necessitated by the need to regulate or obscure the prominently expressed sexual signals inherent in our species. Its role in providing warmth was a secondary, later development. This explains why, even during the warmer months, we feel compelled to wear some form of attire, however lightweight, despite the fact that, in the stifling heat, bare skin would often be far more comfortable. Yet, for the vast majority of us, venturing into public entirely unclothed would be an utterly unthinkable act, a profound violation of social norms. Furthermore, in many nations, there exist explicit laws prohibiting individuals from appearing in public in their natural, unadorned state. From the perspective of an extraterrestrial observer, all of this would, undeniably, appear exceedingly peculiar. Since we have touched upon the subject of temperature, I would like to add that the human body exhibits an extremely intriguing and often puzzling reaction to cold. Many of you may have heard of the phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. This refers to instances where individuals who have frozen to death are found partially or entirely unclothed. That is to say, in the moments preceding their demise from hypothermia, they, contrary to all logical reasoning, tore off their clothing. This occurs due to the dilation of blood vessels in the final, desperate moments of life, which creates a false sensation of unbearable heat, prompting the individual to shed layers of clothing. However, I have not encountered as frequent a mention of another, arguably more fascinating, reaction, which is termed terminal digging, or burrowing behavior, and which typically manifests a few minutes before death. One study describes how bodies, either partially or fully unclothed, were discovered in positions indicative of a final, instinctive protective mechanism. These individuals were found beneath beds, behind wardrobes, on shelves, and in other enclosed spaces. Researchers believe this to be an autonomous process initiated in the brainstem, which is activated in a freezing individual, triggering a primitive, self-protective behavior akin to the burrowing or nest-building instinct observed in hibernating animals. This behavior is theorized to aid in preventing the loss of any remaining body heat. This phenomenon, which we term terminal burrowing behavior, was predominantly observed during slow, gradual decreases in temperature and under moderately cold conditions. Returning to the initial purpose of our clothing, it must be said that with the shift in cultural conditions, the focus sometimes moved from merely concealing gender-specific features to actively suppressing secondary sexual signals. Young women began to wear dresses that covered their legs and chests, and head coverings that concealed their hair. In many cultures, men started shaving their beards and mustaches, which are, in fact, secondary sexual characteristics. Most women, and a notable portion of men, also remove hair from their armpits because, as mentioned earlier, this hair traps body odor. Bodily postures, too, became subject to a form of social censorship. When sitting, women learned to avoid spreading their legs, as this posture is often interpreted as a sexual signal. Instead, they tightly press their knees together or cross their legs. When laughing, they often instinctively cover their mouths with a hand. In society, it is generally considered acceptable to publicly clean dirt from, for instance, one's hands or feet. However, inserting one's fingers into the mouth to dislodge a piece of food stuck in the teeth, or extracting lint from the navel, or removing a stray piece of fluff from the nose or ears, is, for some inexplicable reason, deemed socially inappropriate. This is especially true for women. Morris suggests that this phenomenon is linked to the fact that humans are extraordinarily susceptible to symbolic meanings. Therefore, inserting fingers into natural orifices is implicitly prohibited because it can trigger inappropriate or unwelcome associations, particularly those related to intimate bodily functions. Furthermore, the practice of total body deodorization is widely prevalent. The body is washed and bathed far more frequently than would be strictly necessary for medical or hygienic reasons alone. Due to prevailing social norms, natural body odors are actively suppressed. This is achieved through the widespread use of commercially produced chemical deodorants and antiperspirants, sold in vast quantities. Many individuals adopt these measures, guided by a simple, unassailable strategy. It is improper, it is not customary, or it is impolite. The true, underlying anti-sexual nature of such restrictions is rarely articulated, or even consciously considered. While there is certainly room for debate on this point, our journey continues. Physical contact has become such an intrinsic and potent element of sexual behavior that it too had to be carefully avoided in everyday social interactions. A tacit prohibition on physical contact with unfamiliar individuals was introduced. In our largely formal and somewhat sterile society, any accidental brushing against the body of a stranger is almost immediately followed by an apology, and the sincerity of that apology often increases in direct proportion to the perceived sexual attractiveness of the body that was inadvertently touched. If one were to project, in fast motion, a film depicting a crowd moving through a street or circulating around a large building, the astonishing complexity of these continuous maneuvers, all undertaken with the aim of avoiding physical contact, would become strikingly apparent. Beyond all the previously enumerated behaviors, human beings have also devised an intricate array of moral codes and religious precepts. While these vary significantly from one culture to another, they almost invariably contain injunctions that serve to inhibit the arousal of unrelated individuals and to restrict extramarital sexual encounters. However, no matter how diligently we strive to conform, our primal impulses do not simply vanish. Again, we encounter that evolutionary seam, that point of connection between our newly acquired behavioral programs and the ancient, deeply rooted nature of the typical primate. This seam is perpetually under strain, constantly threatening to tear, and the ape within us frequently rebels. Scarcely are any artificial restrictions introduced, resolving one set of problems, when new situations arise that utterly undermine them. This often leads to amusing and deeply contradictory situations. For example, a woman may meticulously conceal her breasts, only to then use a brassiere to emphasize their contours, subtly mimicking a state of sexual readiness. Lipstick and blush serve the very same purpose, as does all manner of cosmetic enhancement designed to visually enlarge the eyes. Large, prominent eyes are considered attractive because they are interpreted as indicators of high levels of female sex hormones and a strong capacity for fertility. The fashion for exposing the navel, the practice of body piercing in natural orifices, and countless other trends, all subtly or overtly tap into these ancient signaling systems. We meticulously remove hair from our armpits, which naturally trap body odor, and thoroughly cleanse our bodies, annihilating any natural signal-bearing sense. Then, paradoxically, we apply perfumes and colognes that emit fragrances far more potent and, often, universally more pleasant than our natural body odor, scents that will appeal to a much broader spectrum of potential mates. As for human males, they too engage in analogous behaviors. For instance, they wear jackets that visually broaden the shoulder girdle, conveying an impression of strength and dominance. They adorn themselves with expensive watches, rings, and chains, conspicuously displaying wealth and status. They wear shoes with heels, which serve to visually increase their apparent height. Both men and women wear shoes with heels, but they do so for distinct reasons, although ultimately the underlying evolutionary imperative is the same. Men wear shoes with heels because, subconsciously, women, all other factors being equal, tend to prefer taller men. However, there's an important nuance here. Research indicates that men, on average, are most satisfied with partners who are approximately 8 centimeters, about 3 inches, shorter than themselves. Conversely, women, on average, ideally desire a man who is a significant 21 centimeters, about 8 inches, taller than themselves, all other factors being equal. Given that the average man is only about 12 centimeters, about 5 inches, taller than the average woman, this means the average woman desires a man who is not merely taller than herself, but a man who is taller than most other men in her population. This strongly suggests that the preference for height is not solely linked to the practical advantages of a taller male in hunting or resource acquisition, but also to a perception of dominance over other men. These are not mere conjectures. The imperative to defer to taller individuals is, in essence, an ingrained biological program. A compelling, though perhaps not strictly scientific, experiment was conducted, clearly illustrating this phenomenon. A tall man and a shorter man, both dressed in a similar style, were tasked with walking a predetermined distance on a busy day in Times Square, explicitly instructed not to yield to approaching pedestrians. The results were telling. The shorter man collided with passers-by 18 times, whereas the taller man, due to people instinctively yielding to him, encountered only a single collision. The preference women exhibit for taller men also partially supports the attractive son hypothesis, which I touched upon earlier. Recall that this hypothesis posits that, ideally, a woman should seek out the male most desired by other women and bear him a son. Height is one of the most highly heritable traits, with its heritability estimated at approximately 80%. Therefore, if a woman bears a son by a tall man, that son will likely inherit considerable height, which would constitute a significant advantage in the competitive mate market. However, if she bears a tall daughter, that height could, conversely, become a noticeable impediment, significantly narrowing her pool of potential partners. Indeed, the attractive son hypothesis has not been entirely discarded. It may well operate partially, compelling at least some women to experience an internal conflict, seeking a partner who possesses mutually exclusive qualities. Evolution, which, as a reminder, operates through a process of trial and error, is entirely capable of producing such paradoxical outcomes. To project an even more dominant demeanor, men sometimes cultivate beards. Have you ever noticed your own behavior in moments of intense anger or rage? You might unconsciously clench your jaw, almost thrusting it forward, an ancient, primitive display of the biting apparatus. In our species, a prominent jawline is associated with aggression and dominance. Presumably, beards in men exist because they visually enlarge the jaw, making it appear more formidable. A jaw thrust forward, whether male or female, invariably signals an aggressive disposition, an intent to attack. This particular facial gesture is the direct antithesis of submissive expressions, which typically involve a relaxed or softened jawline. Conversely, an individual with a prominent thrusting chin often projects an air of self-assurance and unyielding confidence. Returning to the topic of high-heeled footwear, the reasons for men's use of them are somewhat clearer. But for women, the explanation is more complex. Simply observe, from a detached perspective, a pair of high-heeled shoes, as if you had never encountered them before. It is an incredibly peculiar artifact of human culture. Who, in their right mind, would ever conceive that wearing such an impractical and potentially uncomfortable item would be a good idea? Why do women wear them? The popular belief is that high heels are imposed upon women by fashion trends, marketers, cinema, Barbie dolls, and countless other external influences. However, such explanations are largely specious. Research consistently indicates that women with a higher leg-to-body length ratio than the average in the population are perceived as more attractive by most men. This is hypothetically linked to the observation that, at the onset of puberty, girls' legs typically experience a more rapid growth spurt than their torsos, leading to a period where they appear disproportionately long. Subsequently, leg growth generally ceases, and for a time, growth continues almost exclusively in the upper body, altering the overall body proportions. Thus, it is highly probable that long legs are unconsciously associated with youth, a powerful indicator of reproductive fitness. Of course, this does not imply that men are attracted to prepubescent girls. Rather, men are drawn to a combination of biological markers signaling both youth and sexual maturity. These markers, when present in isolation, typically do not elicit the same attraction. That is to say, long legs must invariably be accompanied by, for example, wide hips or other clear indicators of sexual maturity. This is precisely what high heels accomplish. They create an illusion of increased leg length, thereby visually exaggerating this powerful biological marker of youth, a marker that is, in its extreme expression, atypical for sexually mature females. Thus, it is not a matter of culturally imposed standards of beauty. To suggest so is to confuse cause and effect. Humanity, through a process of trial and error, simply stumbled upon ways to amplify and accentuate the very signals that our inner nature, our deeply ingrained biology, already finds profoundly appealing. This evolutionary seam I have described, this subtle tension between ancient instincts and novel adaptations, exists not only in the dynamics between the sexes. Recall that we evolved to be primate predators, and consider, for a moment, this paradoxical combination. For primates are predominantly herbivorous. Thus, we have become a truly peculiar hybrid, a creature encompassing the traits of both plant eaters and flesh eaters. A reverse situation, interestingly, occurred with the panda. The panda is, genetically, a bear, a carnivorous animal that over time transitioned into a vegetarian. The crucial point is that such a drastic shift in the destiny of a species frequently results in the emergence of an organism with a somewhat split personality. And now, you will observe yet another instance of how, within your own being, two fundamentally opposing worlds coexist. Primates, due to the constant availability of plant-based food, typically chew small amounts almost continuously throughout the day. Carnivores, by contrast, consume large meals with significant intervals between feeding sessions. And humans, as true carnivores in their fundamental eating patterns, despite the abundance of food in the modern world, continue to adhere to a distinctly predatory eating schedule. The overwhelming majority of people on the planet consume meals 3 to 4 times a day in substantial portions. And here, again, the underlying reason is not primarily rooted in established cultural traditions, but rather in deep biological principles. In our contemporary world, we could effortlessly revert to the continuous, small-portion grazing habits characteristic of primates were we inclined to do so. Yet, we persist in adhering to a structured mealtime schedule, as if we were still actively engaged in the arduous pursuit of the hunt. Furthermore, humans generally do not enjoy eating cold food. We reheat it, preferring to consume it hot, and this, in itself, is rather peculiar. Granted, there is a logical rationale for using thermal processing to eliminate bacteria, for instance in raw meat. But why do we require microwave ovens? Why do we reheat already cooked food that has simply cooled down? And why do we derive such profound pleasure from consuming reheated, hot food? It is because we are, in all likelihood, unconsciously mimicking the body temperature of freshly caught prey. Although humans have long since ceased to consume freshly killed, warm meat, the primal urge to eat it at the same temperature as other carnivores has persisted within us. And as we can observe, this drive is incredibly powerful. However, the naked ape's profound craving for sweetness is a trait alien to carnivores. Lions, for example, do not consume oranges. This particular predilection, then, undeniably stems from our primate ancestors, who reveled in the succulence of sweet fruits. And it is precisely sweet foods that we most frequently select when we desire a snack between main meals, a behavior that once again reflects the ape-like tendency to chew frequently and in small quantities. Thus, in this specific aspect, humanity has, in essence, inherited the best of both worlds. But your predatory instincts are only just beginning to reveal themselves. If you are a companion to a domestic cat, you are undoubtedly aware that for them, the acts of hunting, killing, and consuming their prey are 3 distinct, and not necessarily interconnected, activities. That is to say, a cat may stalk and chase a mouse without ultimately killing it, or it may kill the mouse without ever consuming it. Why does this peculiar disassociation occur? It is because the entire process of seeking and acquiring sustenance in the wild is often exceedingly protracted and physically demanding. Consequently, evolution, in its ingenious wisdom, essentially compelled predators to derive pleasure from each individual stage of the process by creating distinct, almost independent, motivational systems. Thus, even if your well-fed, pampered cat consumes only domestic cat food, it retains an innate, deeply ingrained need to occasionally pounce upon a charging cable or a dangling string. This is the inherent behavior of all predators. However, if we turn our attention to typical primates, they do not exhibit such behaviors. They lack these specific motivational mechanisms because they do not require them. Stationary food in the form of fruits or leaves is always readily available, simply waiting to be plucked and consumed. Consequently, hunting does not constitute a primary element of their lives. Now allow yourself to sense the echo of evolution reverberating within your very being. Despite the fact that naked apes have largely replaced the exhilarating pursuit of the hunt with the sedentary confines of often dull, temperature-controlled office environments, many individuals compensate for this fundamental shift through participation in sports or engaging in games of chance. In these activities, much like cats playfully hunting a charging cable, they substitute a real quarry with something symbolic. Consider, from a detached, objective perspective, the game of soccer, football. What, precisely, are these individuals on the field actually doing? And crucially, why? The answer is remarkably simple. They are, quite literally, for the sheer pleasure of it, exploiting mechanisms that arose through evolution for the purpose of seeking and acquiring sustenance. The act of running after a ball symbolically replaces the pursuit of prey. The intricate passing of the ball among teammates corresponds to the cooperative strategies of ancient hunters, and the triumphant act of scoring a goal represents the symbolic killing of the quarry. All who have played soccer intimately understand that every single element of the game, the chase, the teamwork, the precision of a pass, the exhilaration of a goal, brings with it a profound sense of satisfaction and pleasure. If these deeply embedded mechanisms did not exist, soccer would not only be a game no one played, but it would, quite simply, never have been conceived or invented in the first place. However, there are also some naked apes who literally keep actual hunting weapons in their secure storage. And they do so not because it is their sole means of acquiring sustenance. In concluding this point, it must be reiterated that all of this makes sense to humans only because, like a true predator, for us, the acts of hunting, killing, and consuming food are distinct activities, each of which yields a unique form of satisfaction. There are, of course, naked apes who declare themselves to be neither hunters nor killers, and if this is a conscious, deeply considered choice, it is a choice worthy of respect. However, more often, such declarations stem from a simple naivety, a superficial understanding of one's own fundamental nature. For it has long been established that if a human being is frequently exposed to bloodshed, they very quickly lose their sensitivity to it. This, too, is an evolutionary mechanism, simply because, in the harsh realities of the wild, it would be impossible to prepare meat without confronting, face to face, the act of killing a living creature. Any individual who could not tolerate this stark reality failed to pass on their genes. Therefore, yes, humans are, in many respects, a remarkably brutal species. You possess yet another ancient adaptation, one that manifests itself, for instance, even now, as you perceive these images, assuming, of course, that like most individuals, you experience a natural apprehension of heights. The body's primary instinctive reaction in such a situation is to desperately cling to something with a death grip. But something else also occurs, a more subtle yet powerful physiological response. Your palms and the soles of your feet begin to perspire. Crucially, it is predominantly these areas alone that exhibit this sweating. This particular perspiration bears no relation whatsoever to the cooling of the body. Rather, it is an adaptive physiological reaction of your organism, triggered under the influence of stress, specifically designed to enhance the grip of your extremities on surfaces where such adhesion is paramount. One might initially dismiss this as absurd, imagining that such moisture would only cause you to slip. However, in the vast majority of cases, a small amount of moisture, in fact, has precisely the opposite effect. To offer a more accessible example, try donning a latex glove on a sweaty palm, or attempting to slide your sweaty feet into tight footwear. You will likely find the friction significantly increased. It is for this precise reason that individuals, for instance, sometimes spit on their hands before wielding an axe to split wood, thereby enhancing their grip. Thus, during any stressful situation, our palms and soles of our feet exhibit this distinctive sweating. The phenomenon of palmar sweating can also be observed in entire communities, even nations, when their collective safety is perceived to be under threat. During a political crisis, for example, when the threat of nuclear war unexpectedly escalated, all forms of experiments related to palmar sweating conducted in a particular research institution had to be abandoned. This was because the baseline level of physiological response deviated so dramatically from the norm that any further experiments would have been rendered meaningless. This physiological stress response was invaluable in the retention of hunting weapons and in the tenacious pursuit of prey. As has been repeatedly emphasized, for successful hunting, human ancestors were compelled to learn to cooperate. This, too, is a behavior that is profoundly atypical for primates. Among typical primate species, the prevailing dynamics revolve primarily around competition and dominance. They do not require complex, highly coordinated actions to simply pluck a banana from a tree. Consequently, the naked ape was forced to develop behavioral patterns akin to those of wolves, who hunt in organized packs. It had to acquire the capacity for deep cooperation across all forms of human organizations, from academic societies, social clubs, fraternal orders, professional unions, and clandestine societies, to adolescent street gangs. A powerful and pervasive sense of male solidarity can be discerned. Members of these groups proudly display badges, uniforms, and other identifying symbols. Ceremonies of initiation for newly accepted members are invariably conducted. In essence, such communities embody the enduring spirit of the primal male brotherhood that characterized ancient hunting groups. The significant role these groupings play in the lives of adult men underscores the persistent vitality of these deeply rooted, primeval aspirations. Indeed, due to our predatory nature and the necessity of cooperative hunting, we, like wolves, evolved into a highly cooperative species. We unite into groups and are prepared, at any cost, to defend these groups. And it is this very state of affairs, Morris contends, that will, paradoxically, likely lead to our ultimate demise. To put it mildly, we have found ourselves in a deeply precarious predicament, and it is highly probable that, at some future point, we will, through our own actions, bring about our own destruction. The only solace to be found in this sobering prospect is the thought that we will have lived an interesting, albeit perhaps not exceptionally long, existence as a species. Yet, it will have been an astonishingly eventful and rich epoch. Consider the core issue. Like all predators, the naked ape developed dangerous adaptations for hunting. In other predators, these manifest as sharp teeth and formidable claws. In our ancestors, they took the form of sharp, precisely flaked stone tools. Given the inherent danger of these instruments, it is evolutionarily disadvantageous for members of the same species to engage in conflict with one another. This is because if two wolves or two lions quarrel, A fight between them can, in mere seconds, result in severe injury or even death, precisely because both are formidably equipped for combat. If, over the course of evolution, stringent rules prohibiting the use of these weapons against fellow members of one's own species are not developed, that species would rapidly face extinction. Consequently, wolves, lions, humans, and indeed all other predators have evolutionarily developed intrinsic mechanisms to avoid unnecessary conflict and bloodshed between kin. Firstly, the awareness of each member's place within the group hierarchy serves to avert direct clashes. When you find yourself in any collective, you very rapidly and unconsciously assess your own position and the positions of others within that group's hierarchical structure. You instinctively discern who commands deference and who can be directed. For instance, in a school or university setting, upon encountering new instructors, we typically grasp, almost instantaneously, which ones are not to be trifled with. This is such an ancient, deeply embedded aspect of our psychology that you could easily discern the hierarchy even within a group of chimpanzees. And all these intricate hierarchical dynamics operate at a profoundly unconscious level. Let me elaborate. Perhaps a decade ago, I observed an experiment on National Geographic that illustrated how the timbre of a voice unconsciously influences human perception. The experiment involved a man at a train station demanding that people avoid stepping into a square chalked on the floor, an utterly preposterous request. When he delivered this demand in a loud but high-pitched voice, passers-by largely ignored his absurd insistence, regarding him with amusement or bewilderment, and simply walked on. However, the moment his voice dropped to a low, resonant register, pedestrians immediately and unconsciously perceived him as commanding authority. People, in an almost instinctive deference, complied with his unusual yet authoritatively voiced demand. Some even paused, seemingly compelled to adhere to his unexpected instruction. All of this powerfully suggests that, despite our advanced intellect and our sophisticated capacity to interpret complex meanings conveyed through language, the primal, instinctively uttered sounds, growls, grumbles, moans, shouts, and so forth, remain primary. They convey the same fundamental information to everyone, everywhere, regardless of the specific language an individual speaks. Indeed, this system is so ancient that even a dog can discern the meaning of a particular emotionally charged sound. In summary, the evolutionary mechanism embedded within your mind, which ascertains one's place within a hierarchy, plays a crucial role in helping us avoid conflicts. And, of course, we were not designed to inhabit vast metropolises teeming with millions of people. Our evolved behaviors are calibrated for functioning within the confines of small tribal groups, typically comprising around 100 individuals. In such contexts, every member of the tribe is personally known to everyone else, much as is currently observed among ape communities. Within small tribes, a clear hierarchy is readily established, and each individual inherently understands their position within it. In the context of a large city, however, its inhabitants are compelled to contend daily with an innumerable multitude of unfamiliar individuals, a situation utterly unprecedented for any other primate species. To engage in personal hierarchical relationships with every single person encountered is an impossible feat, though such interaction would constitute the natural, evolved tendency. Instead, deprived of the opportunity to establish clear dominance or submission dynamics, individuals are forced to allow others to simply flow past them. In response to this inherent disarray, naked apes have developed a specialized behavioral model oriented toward preventing physical contact. This manifests, for instance, when an individual of one sex accidentally brushes against a member of the opposite sex, thereby violating the unspoken rule of no touching. In such instances, we immediately offer an apology, aiming to convey that the contact was unintentional. Despite the fact that we every day encounter hundreds and thousands of people, the number of truly personal acquaintances we cultivate throughout our lives consistently approximates the size of a small tribal group. Thus, we once again adhere to the fundamental biological rules established by our ancient ancestors. So, we have discussed the first mechanism for reducing intraspecies aggression, the recognition of hierarchy. Secondly, evolutionary mechanisms for avoiding conflict also manifest in what are known as submission postures, a concept I touched upon earlier when discussing introductions. These postures are typically the antithesis of aggressive stances and, by their very nature, serve to quell that aggression. For example, when a conflict arises, an animal will maintain unbroken eye contact and attempt to inflate its perceived size through various means, arching its back, bristling its fur, and so forth, all designed to intimidate its rival. However, if the aim is to convey to another that one poses no threat, the logical course of action is to do precisely the opposite. A wolf, for instance, will lower itself to the ground, its ears flattened, its fur smoothed. In some cases, a defeated animal signals its surrender by exposing a vulnerable area to the aggressor. A chimpanzee, for example, might extend its hand, risking a potentially dangerous bite, a gesture that an aggressive chimpanzee would never make. Such an appeasement gesture often calms the dominant animal. Humans, remarkably, engage in precisely the same behaviors. If furrowed eyebrows are a signal of aggression, then raised eyebrows, conversely, signal the opposite. To avoid provoking hostility, individuals instinctively attempt to appear smaller and more submissive, often by hunching their shoulders. But if an individual finds themselves in a dire predicament, as a last resort to appease an aggressor, the naked ape, just like many other primates, may prostrate itself on the ground. Similarly, a person extends their hand when begging for alms or imploring someone for help. And yes, the popular belief that the handshake between men originated as a ritualistic display of an unarmed hand is likely incorrect. The friendly handshake possesses deeper, instinctive roots, reflecting the same innate impulse that compels a chimpanzee to extend its hand as a gesture of appeasement and respect. However, you may recall situations where your outstretched hand was not met with a reciprocal greeting. Such an oversight can even escalate into physical conflict, particularly if the refusal to shake hands was deliberate, as it places you, against your will, in the vulnerable position of supplicant. This, precisely, is the underlying dynamic at play. Consequently, a handshake may be replaced by a bow or a nod, gestures that also convey deference and respect. So yes, friendly gestures often find their evolutionary blueprint in gestures of submission, such as a smile or an embrace. But let us proceed further. Visual contact is such a universal signal of aggression in the animal kingdom that it is generally wise to avoid it, especially with unfamiliar animals like dogs. According to a report in a medical journal, maintaining direct eye contact is one of the reasons why young children are more likely to become victims of dog attacks. Among primates, direct eye contact is considered especially aggressive. Many people harbor the illusion that our closest relatives, chimpanzees, due to their comparatively smaller size, pose no significant threat to humans. However, I would strongly advise against searching for accounts of chimpanzee attacks on humans. They are considerably stronger and more agile than us and can be incredibly aggressive and profoundly brutal. Even a small chimpanzee is capable of killing a human if it so chooses. While such incidents are rare, provoking them by maintaining prolonged eye contact may not be a wise course of action. And if you are a male naked ape and you gaze intently into the eyes of another unfamiliar male naked ape, he will likely interpret this as a direct challenge. And with a significant degree of probability, he may initiate an attack. Or, if you appear sufficiently formidable, he will attempt to quickly retreat. This is why, during ordinary conversation, people typically avert their gaze intermittently, seeking to avoid any accidental provocation. So, firstly, the awareness of each member's place in the hierarchy helps us avoid clashes. Secondly, the evolutionary mechanism for preventing conflicts manifests in submission postures. And thirdly, if a conflict does in fact occur, then among higher animals, instead of a literal physical battle, a ritualized confrontation takes place. You have witnessed this countless times, for example, with street cats. They almost never immediately attack each other because an evolutionary program designed to limit intraspecies aggression is at work. Cats will bristle their fur, arch their backs, stretch their necks, and hiss at each other, and then one of them will typically retreat. A real fight only occurs when absolutely necessary, after aggressive signals and counter-threats have failed to resolve the feline dispute. In humans, quite literally the very same mechanism is at play. We possess the most complex facial musculature among all animals on the planet, allowing for a vast array of subtle nuances in expression. Eyebrows such as ours are unique to our species, and some researchers posit that they primarily serve to protect the eyes from sweat dripping down the forehead, which certainly makes biological sense. However, eyebrows also possess a far more crucial function. They enable us to effortlessly transmit nonverbal signals to one another. The mere act of shaving off one's eyebrows would immediately render an individual significantly less attractive in the eyes of others. This is because if one's facial expressions are difficult to interpret, one becomes a poorly predictable entity, which is perceived as a negative trait. However, when considering other primates, one needs practice and familiarity to discern whether an ape's facial expression indicates friendliness. Yet, you will immediately recognize if a primate is enraged or frightened. In these instances, our mimetic expressions are indistinguishable. Furthermore, the expressions of aggression and fear are so ancient that you can interpret them even in mammals quite distantly related to us. Thus, when two human individuals are in conflict, they too begin to shift their posture, their brows furrowing, their necks tensing, their broad back muscles flexing to appear larger. They might growl, threaten each other, and shove. Frequently, one individual will display a reaction of fear, which, in turn, effectively quells the aggression in the opponent, bringing the confrontation to an end. This is how our biology operates to mitigate intraspecies aggression in its broadest strokes. And all these intricate mechanisms, painstakingly refined over millions of years of evolution, prove to be utterly useless in the context of modernity. Our troubles began at the very moment we invented the first projectile weapons, for with distance one cannot engage in hierarchical negotiation. From a distance it is impossible to read signals of submission or to conduct a ritualized confrontation. The losing party has no opportunity to surrender or to flee. Today we possess the capacity to destroy adversaries while being separated from them by hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of kilometers. Consider as an example internet commentators spewing hatred and animosity towards one another. If these individuals were to meet in person, they would, in all likelihood, not even engage in a physical altercation, thanks to the biological mechanisms we have just described. But imagine if, without leaving their monitors, they each possessed a red button that could unleash destruction upon the other. In such a scenario, no biological inhibitors would function due to the sheer remoteness of the adversaries. In the context of modern warfare, the traditional signals of appeasement or flight are absent, leading to mass killings on a scale unprecedented in any other living creature. It is entirely plausible that the propensity for warfare in humans is, to some extent, genetic. For instance, chimpanzees, with whom we shared a common ancestor approximately 7 million years ago, are, like us, capable of organized aggression. They meticulously patrol their territories and brutally kill any stray outsiders from their own species. They also engage in military expeditions against neighboring chimpanzee populations with the objective of expanding their own territory. In essence, humans and chimpanzees are the only species on Earth known to engage in warfare. And, as Morris asserts, a truly effective solution to this profound problem of self-destruction, a problem arising from the fact that modern technology fails to account for our deep biological programming, simply does not yet exist. One might contend that all these discussions about evolution are mere nonsense, and that we were, in fact, created by a divine being. And you are certainly entitled to hold such a belief. However, it is entirely plausible that the very existence of religion is, itself, also a derivative of our primal animalistic past. An absolute, consider this, an asterisk absolute majority of people living on this planet adhere to one form of religion or another. Such a pervasive phenomenon cannot simply arise nihilo asterisk from an empty void. There must unequivocally be some underlying biological foundation at play. What, then, unites all forms of religious activity? It is the demonstration of submission and deference to a dominant individual, an entity who, across diverse cultures, assumes varied guises, yet invariably embodies an immense, often overwhelming power. Sometimes this entity is depicted as a non-human animal, embodying raw, untamed force. At other times, it is rendered as a wise, venerable, elder figure from our own species, representing accumulated knowledge and authority. Occasionally, it becomes something more abstract, referred to simply as the Creator, or by some other similarly evocative name. Since none of these divine entities exist in a visibly or tangibly observable form, it is not immediately apparent why they were conceived. Morris suggests that the explanation, once again, lies in our ape-like past. Typically, in every primate group, a dominant male, the alpha, reigns supreme. He governs the group, asserting his authority over others, and it is upon him that one can vent one's frustrations and complaints. In return, the alpha actively defends the group from external threats and mediates disputes among his subordinates. This all-encompassing, almost omnipotent role imbues him with a godlike status. The deep, reverential awe, the submissive attitude toward such a supreme, absolutely all-powerful figure who could maintain control over the group still resides within us, a lingering echo from primeval times. Our obsequious attitude towards this figure can manifest in various ways. Individuals might close their eyes, bow their heads in a supplicating gesture, intertwine their fingers, kneel, kiss the ground, or even prostrate themselves fully. I believe it is no longer necessary to elaborate on the primal origins of these deferential gestures. If these expressions of profound submissiveness are successfully executed, the dominant entity is, in essence, appeased. Given the immense power attributed to this supreme being, these appeasing ceremonies must be conducted at regular and frequent intervals, lest this supreme being once again fall into a state of wrath. This supreme being is usually, though not always, referred to as God. Morris believes that while religion has, undeniably, caused considerable hardship and suffering within human societies, it simultaneously serves a vital dual function. On one hand, it acts as a powerful adhesive, binding millions of individuals together into cohesive social structures. On the other hand, due to our inherent nature, the existence of religion is simply an unavoidable reality. This is because, even when we vehemently reject all things religious, a substitute invariably emerges, often quickly, in a new guise. This new manifestation may be meticulously disguised, appearing entirely secular on its surface, yet it invariably contains all the same fundamental elements of reverence, hierarchy, and a quest for ultimate meaning that characterized its predecessors. Many, for instance, consider science to be the ultimate antithesis of religion. Yet for the average naked ape, this distinction is not so clear-cut. One might observe the profound cult of science that permeates contemporary society. Given the astonishing power that science has demonstrated, the creation of spacecraft, nuclear weapons, life-saving medicines, and the ubiquitous iPhone, people, en masse, can no longer perceive it as anything other than something sacred, something before which one must bow in reverence, something that will, ultimately, resolve all worldly problems. Scientists, in this worldview, are perceived as a kind of priesthood, privy to a higher truth. People show deference to them, hanging their portraits instead of icons, gathering to listen to their pronouncements, and engaging in intellectual communion with them through books. Imbuing all of this with supreme value, one would undoubtedly find many individuals who would faint in awe at the mere sight of Albert Einstein were he still alive. People experience a similar sense of solemn reverence when crossing the threshold of a sacred temple and that of a public library. In both places, one is expected to maintain silence, and in both, one encounters sacred artifacts that must be treated with utmost care. Human beings, all in their nature, are perpetually compelled to believe in something. And, perhaps, belief in science is not the worst thing that has ever befallen humanity. And, as Desmond Morris writes, if the naked ape were, for a fleeting moment, to cast aside all its grandiose pronouncements, to profoundly contemplate its own base nature, and to acknowledge the beast that resides within itself, it would, paradoxically, gain the capacity to live a far more conscious existence. By understanding its